The thunder started before dawn, a low rumble that shook the window panes of the boarding house where Flora Patterson had spent her last night before heading home to her father's ranch. And by the time she saddled her mare and set out on the narrow trail through the canyon, the sky had turned the color of old bruises. It was May of 1882, and the spring rains had been relentless in southern Utah, turning the red rock cliffs above Parowan into treacherous slopes where water ran in streams down every crevice, loosening stones that had stood firm for centuries. Flora knew she should have waited, should have listened to the boarding house owner who had warned her about the conditions. But her father had been alone for 3 weeks while she visited her aunt in Cedar City, and something in his last letter had worried her enough to risk the journey home. The trail wound through a narrow passage where the cliffs rose steep on both sides, creating a natural corridor that was the only direct route between the two towns. Flora had traveled it dozens of times, knew every turn and switchback, but today it felt different. The air hung heavy with moisture, and the rocks glistened wet in the dim morning light. Her mare, a steady sorrel named Rosie, picked her way carefully over the muddy ground, ears flicking nervously at every sound. Flora had just rounded a bend when she heard a crack like a rifle shot, then a roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. She looked up in time to see the cliff face above her splitting, massive boulders breaking free and tumbling down in a cascade of rock and debris. She kicked Rosie hard, urging the mare forward, but there was nowhere to go. The trail ahead narrowed even more, and behind her the Rockslide was already pouring down like a deadly waterfall. The first boulder hit 20 feet in front of her, exploding on impact and sending shrapnel in every direction. Rosie reared, screaming, and Flora felt herself sliding from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, and then Rosie was bolting back the way they had come, reins trailing. Flora tried to crawl after her, but the rocks were still falling, and then something slammed into her left leg and she screamed. When the dust finally settled, Flora found herself pinned beneath a boulder the size of a wagon wheel. It had caught her leg just above the ankle, trapping her against the canyon wall. The pain was white-hot and absolute, radiating up her leg and into her spine. She tried to pull free, but the rock would not budge, and every movement sent fresh agony shooting through her body. Blood seeped from where the rock had torn through her riding skirt, staining the fabric dark. The Rockslide had transformed the trail into an impassable jumble of boulders and debris. On both sides of where she lay trapped, the path was completely blocked. No one could get through. No one would even try until the rock settled completely, which could take days. Flora pressed her hands against the boulder, trying to lift it, but it might as well have been the mountain itself. She was 22 years old, and she was going to die here alone in this canyon. She did not know how long she lay there before she heard the voice. Time had become strange, measured only in waves of pain. The sun had climbed higher, turning the canyon into an oven, and her canteen lay 5 feet away where it had fallen from Rosie's saddle, completely out of reach. "Hello? Is someone there?" Flora's head snapped up. The voice was male, coming from somewhere beyond the rockslide that blocked the trail ahead of her. She tried to call out, but her throat was so dry that only a croak emerged. She swallowed, tasted copper and dust, and tried again. "Help, I'm trapped." Silence. Then the sound of rocks shifting, and the voice came again, closer now. "Hold on, I'm coming." "You cannot get through," Flora shouted, her voice breaking. "The trail is completely blocked." "I can see that," the voice said, and now she could hear him moving, rocks scraping and tumbling. "But I have never let a pile of rocks stop me before, and I do not intend to start now." Despite everything, Flora felt something like hope kindle in her chest. She listened to the sounds of his progress, the steady determination in the way he moved the smaller rocks, testing the larger ones for stability. It seemed to take forever, but gradually the sounds grew closer. She could hear his breathing now, labored with effort, and then a rock near the top of the pile ahead of her shifted and she saw a hand, then a shoulder, and then a man was squeezing through a gap barely wide enough for his body. He was covered in dust from head to toe. His dark hair whitened with it, but when he straightened and she got her first clear look at him, Flora forgot about the pain for a moment. He was tall and lean with broad shoulders, probably around her own age, with gray eyes that went straight to where she lay trapped. His face was all hard angles and sharp lines, weathered by sun and wind in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, and there was blood on his sleeve where the rocks had scraped him raw. "Jesus," he breathed, taking in the boulder pinning her leg. He moved toward her quickly, dropping to his knees beside her and examining the situation with swift efficiency. "I'm Lucas Carr. Can you feel your foot?" "Yes," Flora said, though she was not entirely sure that was a good thing given how much it hurt. "Flora Patterson." Lucas was already working, his hands moving over the boulder, testing it from different angles. "This came down from up there," he said, nodding toward the cliff face. "The whole mountainside is unstable. We need to get you out of here before another slide comes down." "I tried," Flora said, hating how weak her voice sounded. "It will not move." "Not from this angle," Lucas agreed. He stood, looking around at the jumble of rocks surrounding them. "But if I can get leverage, maybe I can shift it enough for you to pull free." "Do you think you can move when I tell you to?" Flora nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as Lucas searched through the debris, finally selecting a long, thick piece of wood that must have been torn from a tree higher up the mountain. He wedged one end under the boulder, then looked around for something to use as a fulcrum. Finding a smaller rock of the right size, he positioned it carefully and tested the leverage. "This is going to hurt," he said, meeting her eyes. There was something in his gaze that steadied her, a calm confidence that made her believe he could actually do this. "When I push down on this lever, the rock should lift just enough for you to pull back. You will only have a second or two before my strength gives out and the rock settles again. Do you understand?" "Yes. On 3 then." 1, 2, 3. Lucas threw his weight onto the lever and the boulder shifted, rising perhaps an inch. Flora pulled with everything she had, ignoring the scream of agony from her leg, and then she was free, dragging herself backward across the rough ground. The boulder thudded back down right where her leg had been. Flora collapsed onto her back, gasping, her vision swimming with pain and relief. She felt Lucas's hands on her leg, gentle but firm, and she forced herself to look. Her ankle was already swelling, the skin darkening with bruises, and the gash where the rock had torn her was still bleeding sluggishly. "It might be broken," Lucas said, his voice tight. "But we cannot stay here to find out. Can you ride?" "My horse bolted." "Mine is back beyond the other side of the slide," Lucas said. He looked up at the cliffs, then at the blocked trail in both directions. "The only way out is the way I came in, through the rocks. I will have to carry you." Before Flora could respond, he was already moving, shrugging out of his jacket and tearing it into strips with his knife. He bound her ankle with surprising gentleness, wrapping the makeshift bandage tight enough to provide support, but not so tight it cut off circulation. Then he pulled off his shirt, leaving only his undershirt, and fashioned a sling for her leg. "This will help keep it stable," he said, and then he was lifting her, one arm under her knees and the other around her back, as if she weighed nothing at all. Flora gasped at the movement, her leg protesting, but Lucas held her steady against his chest. "Hold on to me," he said, and started toward the gap he had climbed through, Getting through the rockslide while carrying her was like watching someone solve an impossible puzzle. Lucas moved with careful precision, testing each handhold and foothold before committing his weight, adjusting his grip on her when he needed both hands to climb. Sometimes he had to set her down on a flat rock while he moved a larger boulder out of the way, creating a path wide enough to navigate. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat ran in rivers down his face, cutting tracks through the dust. "How did you even know I was here?" Flora asked at one point when he had paused to catch his breath. "I was driving cattle to Parowan when I heard the rockslide," Lucas said. "Then I saw your horse come tearing out of the canyon without a rider. Figured someone was in trouble." He lifted her again, grunting with effort. "Lucky I decided to check. This trail will not be passable for weeks." "Lucky," Flora repeated, and felt hysterical laughter bubbling up in her chest. "I have never felt less lucky in my life." Lucas looked down at her, and to her surprise, she saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. "Well, you are still alive. That counts for something." It took more than an hour to traverse what should have been 100 yards of trail. By the time they finally emerged on the other side of the rockslide, both of them were shaking with exhaustion. Lucas's horse, a big roan gelding, stood exactly where he had left it, ground tied and patient. Lucas set Flora down carefully against a boulder, and she watched as he retrieved a canteen from his saddlebag and brought it to her. "Slow sips," he said, but Flora ignored him, gulping down the water until he pulled it away. "Easy. You will make yourself sick." "I thought I was going to die there," Flora said, and was mortified when tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I thought no one would find me until it was too late." Lucas knelt beside her, his expression softening. "But you did not die. You are safe now." He hesitated, then reached out and awkwardly patted her shoulder. "You did good back there. A lot of people would have panicked." Flora wiped at her face, leaving muddy streaks. "I did panic. I just did it quietly." That pulled a real smile from him, transforming his angular face into something almost boyish. "Well, you hit it well." He stood, looking back at the rockslide. "We need to get you to a doctor. The nearest one is in Parowan unless you came from Cedar City." "Parowan," Flora said. "But my father's ranch is only about 5 miles past the town. If you can just get me there, doctor first," Lucas said firmly. "That leg needs proper attention." He moved to his horse, checking the saddle. "Think you can manage to ride? I will walk alongside and keep you steady." "I can manage." Flora was not at all sure that was true, but she was not about to admit it. With Lucas's help, she made it into the saddle, her injured leg hanging free while the other found the stirrup. Every movement sent fresh pain shooting up her leg, but she gritted her teeth and stayed silent. Lucas took the reins and started walking, leading the horse at a careful pace. The main road to Parowan was relatively flat, but every jolt still made Flora wince. She focused on Lucas's back, on the way his shoulders moved under his undershirt, the muscles shifting with each step. His arms were scratched and bleeding from the rocks, and there was a nasty bruise forming on the side of his neck, but he never complained, just kept walking at that steady, measured pace. "You said you were driving cattle," Flora said after a while, needing something to distract her from the pain. "Are you a rancher, Cowboy?" Lucas corrected. "I work for the CR Ranch about 10 miles south of Parowan. We were moving stock to better pasture when the storm hit last night." He glanced back at her. "What about you? What were you doing on that trail alone, visiting my aunt in Cedar City?" "My father runs a small ranch outside Parowan. I was heading home when—" She trailed off, not wanting to relive it. "When the mountain tried to kill you," Lucas finished. "This country has a way of reminding people who is really in charge." They walked in companionable silence for a while. The sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and hot. Flora's throat grew parched again despite the water she had drunk, and the pain in her leg had settled into a constant, throbbing ache that made her feel nauseated. She swayed in the saddle, and immediately Lucas was there, his hand on her knee, steadying her. "Almost there," he said, though they had barely covered half the distance. "Just hold on a little longer." "I am fine," Flora lied. "You are a terrible liar," Lucas said, but there was warmth in his voice that made her smile despite everything. Parowan appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its buildings shimmering in the heat. Lucas picked up the pace slightly, and Flora could feel the tension in him, the worry he was trying to hide. When they finally reached the edge of town, he stopped at the first person he saw, an older man sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store. "Where is Dr. Hayes?" Lucas asked. "2 streets over, next to the church," the man said. Then his eyes went to Flora and widened. "Good Lord, what happened to you, girl?" "Rockslide in the canyon," Lucas said shortly, already moving again. "Someone needs to get word out that the trail is impassable." The doctor's office was a small, neat building with whitewashed walls and blue trim. Lucas tied the horse quickly and then lifted Flora down from the saddle. She tried to stand, but her leg buckled immediately, and she would have fallen if not for his arms around her. "I have you," he said quietly, and carried her inside. Dr. Hayes was a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes and steady hands. He took one look at Flora's leg and ushered them into the examination room, clearing the table for Lucas to set her down on. "Rockslide, you said?" the doctor asked, already cutting away the makeshift bandages Lucas had applied. He examined the injury with gentle efficiency, prodding carefully at the swelling. Flora hissed in pain, and Lucas's hand found hers, squeezing gently. She held on tight, grateful for the anchor. "The ankle is badly sprained but not broken," Dr. Hayes said finally. "The gash will need stitches, and you will be on crutches for several weeks, but you should make a full recovery. You are very lucky, young lady." A few more hours trapped out there in this heat, and it would have been a different story. "She is strong," Lucas said, and something in his voice made Flora look up at him. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something fierce and proud and tender all at once. Dr. Hayes cleaned and stitched the wound, then wrapped the ankle in proper bandages and fitted Flora with a splint. The whole process took nearly an hour, during which Lucas never left her side, his presence steady and comforting. When it was done, the doctor handed her a bottle of laudanum for the pain and strict instructions to stay off the leg for at least 2 weeks. "I need to get word to my father," Flora said, as Lucas helped her off the table. "He will be worried when Rosie shows up without me." "I can ride out to your ranch and let him know you are safe," Lucas offered. "Where exactly is it?" Flora gave him directions, and he nodded. "I will head out right now. Where will you be staying in the meantime? The doctor said you should not travel for a few days." "The boarding house, I suppose," Flora said, though the thought of being alone right now made her chest tight with anxiety. "Mrs. Chen's place has the cleanest rooms," Dr. Hayes said. "Just down the street. I will send word ahead that you are coming." Lucas carried Flora to the boarding house, despite her protests that she could use the crutches the doctor had given her. Mrs. Chen, a tiny Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, took one look at them and immediately began issuing orders to her daughters. Within minutes, Flora was installed in a comfortable room on the first floor with instructions to rest while Mrs. Chen prepared soup. "I should go," Lucas said, hovering in the doorway. He looked reluctant to leave, his hat clutched in his hands. "Your father will want to know you are safe as soon as possible." "Lucas," Flora said, and he stopped. "Thank you. You saved my life today." He shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same. But you were the one who did it," Flora said firmly. You climbed through that rock slide and you carried me out. I will never forget that." Something flickered in Lucas's gray eyes, an emotion too quick to name. "I am glad I was there," he said quietly. Then he settled his hat on his head and was gone. Flora lay back against the pillows, suddenly exhausted. The laudanum was beginning to work, making everything soft around the edges, and she felt herself drifting. Her last conscious thought was of Lucas's arms around her, steady and strong, carrying her to safety. She woke to the sound of voices outside her room, Mrs. Chen and someone else, male and urgent. Then the door opened and her father burst in, his weathered face creased with worry. "Flora, sweetheart," he said, rushing to her bedside. "When your horse came back without you, I thought—" His voice broke. "I am all right, Papa," Flora said, squeezing his hand. "A cowboy named Lucas Carr found me and brought me to safety. He told me what happened," her father said. He looked older suddenly, every one of his 58 years showing in the lines around his eyes. "Said you were trapped under a boulder and he had to climb through the slide to reach you. Jesus, Flora, you could have died." "But I did not," Flora said, echoing Lucas's words from earlier. "I am safe now." Her father stayed for an hour, fussing over her until Flora was both touched and exasperated. He wanted to take her home immediately, but Dr. Hayes arrived and firmly told him that Flora needed to rest for at least 2 more days before attempting the journey. Reluctantly, her father agreed to return home and come back with the wagon to collect her later in the week. "That cowboy," her father said before he left. "Lucas Carr, he works at the CR ranch, you said." "That is what he told me." "I want to thank him properly," her father said. "A man who saves my daughter's life deserves more than words." After her father left, Flora found herself unable to settle. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw rocks falling, felt the crushing weight on her leg, heard Lucas's voice cutting through her panic. But she also remembered the way he had looked at her, the gentleness of his hands, the determination in every step as he carried her through the rock slide. She did not see him again for 3 days. Mrs. Chen kept her well fed and comfortable. The doctor checked on her progress daily, and her father came twice more with updates from the ranch. But there was no sign of Lucas, and Flora found herself looking out the window at every sound of hoofbeats, hoping to see the big roan gelding. On the 4th day, just as her father was loading her into the wagon for the trip home, Lucas rode up. He had cleaned up since the last time Flora saw him, his face scrubbed and his hair combed back, wearing a clean shirt and vest. He swung down from his horse with easy grace and approached the wagon. "Miss Patterson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mr. Patterson, I wanted to check on how you were recovering before you left town." "Much better, thanks to you," Flora said, acutely aware of how her father was watching them both with interest. "The doctor says I should be walking again in a few weeks." "I am glad to hear it." Lucas shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. "I also wanted to apologize for not coming by sooner. We had some trouble with the cattle and I could not get away." "You do not need to apologize," Flora said quickly. "You have already done more than enough." Her father cleared his throat. "Mr. Carr, I would like to invite you to supper at our ranch tomorrow evening. It is the least I can do to properly thank you for saving my daughter's life." Lucas hesitated, his eyes moving to Flora. Whatever he saw in her face made his expression soften. "I would be honored, sir." 6 o'clock, her father said. "Flora can give you better directions than I can. She has always had a better sense of the land." The wagon ride home was uncomfortable, despite the cushions her father had piled in the bed. Every rut in the road sent jolts of pain through Flora's ankle, but she barely noticed. Her mind was too full of Lucas's gray eyes and the way he had smiled when her father invited him to supper. "He seems like a good man," her father said casually, too casually. This Lucas Carr, he is, Flora agreed, trying to match his tone. Young, too. Cannot be more than 23 or 24. Papa, Flora said warningly. Her father raised his hands in mock surrender. I am just making observations. It is not every day a man risks his life climbing through a rockslide for someone he has never met. He said anyone would have done the same. But not everyone would have been capable of it, her father pointed out. Takes a special kind of courage and strength to do what he did, and the way he looked at you just now. He trailed off meaningfully. Flora felt heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. You are imagining things. Her father just smiled and said nothing more, but Flora caught him watching her with a speculative gleam in his eye that made her nervous. The ranch felt both familiar and strange after her time away. Everything was exactly as she had left it, the small house her father had built when he first claimed this land 20 years ago. The barn with its sagging roof that needed repairs. The corral where their handful of horses grazed. But Flora felt changed somehow, as if the rockslide had shifted something fundamental inside her. That night, she lay in her own bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling around her. She kept thinking about Lucas's hands wrapping her ankle, the steady rhythm of his breathing as he carried her, the way he had smiled when he said she was strong. She had known him for less than a day, had spent most of that time either in pain or drugged with laudanum, but something about him had lodged itself in her chest like a stone. She wondered if he felt it too, that strange pull between them, or if she was letting gratitude and trauma blur into something else entirely. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Flora could not help with any of the ranch work, confined to the porch with her leg propped up, and every time she tried to help her father with supper preparations, he shooed her away. By the time 6 o'clock approached, she had changed her dress twice and was contemplating a third change when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Through the window, she watched Lucas ride up on his roan, looking nervous in a way that made her smile. He had clearly made an effort, his shirt pressed and his boots polished, his hat freshly brushed. He dismounted and stood for a moment, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for battle, then walked to the door. Flora's father opened it before Lucas could knock, his weathered face creasing in a genuine smile. "Mr. Carr, right on time. Come in, come in." Flora had positioned herself on the settee in the main room, her injured leg carefully arranged. When Lucas entered and saw her, his whole face lit up in a way that made her breath catch. "Miss Patterson," he said, "you look well. Please call me Flora. I think saving someone's life earns you the right to use their first name." "Only if you call me Lucas," he said, and when he smiled, Flora felt that strange pull in her chest grow stronger. Supper was roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables from the garden, simple but delicious. Flora's father kept the conversation flowing, asking Lucas about his work at the CR ranch, his family, how he had come to Utah. Lucas answered easily, his initial nervousness fading as he relaxed. Flora learned that he was 24, originally from Wyoming, and had been working as a cowboy since he was 16. His parents had died of fever when he was young, and he had been raised by an uncle who taught him everything about cattle and horses. "What about you?" Lucas asked Flora when her father stepped out to get more bread. "Have you always lived here, all my life?" Flora said. "My mother died when I was 10. Since then it has been just Papa and me running this place. It is small, but it is ours." "It is beautiful land," Lucas said, looking out the window at the red rock formations glowing in the last light of sunset. "Hard, but beautiful. Like the people who live here," Flora said without thinking, then felt her cheeks flush. Lucas met her eyes and something passed between them, electric and undeniable. "Yes," he said softly, "exactly like that." Her father returned with the bread, and the moment passed, but Flora could not stop thinking about the way Lucas had looked at her, as if she was something precious he was afraid to break. After supper, her father invited Lucas out to the porch for whiskey and cigars. Flora hobbled after them on her crutches, determined not to be left out. The three of them sat in the cooling evening air, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I cannot thank you enough for what you did for Flora," her father said seriously. "She is all I have in this world. If I had lost her—" He stopped, his voice thick with emotion. "You do not need to thank me, sir," Lucas said. "I am just grateful I was in the right place at the right time. Still, if there is anything I can do for you, anything at all, you just name it." Lucas was quiet for a moment, turning his glass in his hands. "Actually, sir, there is something. I have been saving my wages for the past few years, putting away everything I can. I want to start my own ranch someday, have my own land and cattle. The CR ranch is good work, but I want something that is mine, you know." "I do know," Flora's father said. "I felt the same way at your age. It is a hard road building something from nothing, but it is worth it." "Your daughter said this is a small operation," Lucas continued carefully. "I was wondering if you might need another hand. I know you cannot pay much, if anything, but I would work for room and board and a chance to learn how to run a ranch properly. The CR is too big, I never see the full operation from start to finish. But here, with just the two of you, I could learn everything." Flora's heart was pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. She looked at her father, trying to keep her expression neutral, but she could not hide the hope in her eyes. Her father looked between them, and Flora saw understanding dawn on his face. "That is an interesting proposition," he said slowly. "Flora, what do you think? Could we use an extra hand around here? The barn roof needs repairs," Flora said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And there are at least a dozen other projects that need doing. We could certainly use the help if Lucas is serious." "I am serious," Lucas said, looking directly at her. "Very serious." "Then I suppose you can start whenever you are ready," her father said. "We have a bunkhouse that is not much to look at, but it is clean and dry. You would take your meals with us, and in exchange you work the ranch and learn what you need to learn. Does that sound fair?" "More than fair," Lucas said, and the smile on his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Thank you, sir. I will give my notice at the CR tomorrow and be back by the end of the week." After Lucas left, riding off into the darkness with a final wave, Flora's father turned to her with a knowing look. "Do not say it," Flora warned. "I am not saying anything," her father said innocently. "Just that it is convenient how things worked out. Him needing to learn ranching, us needing help, you needing someone to look after you while that ankle heals." "Papa," Flora groaned, but she could not help smiling. Lucas returned 4 days later with his belongings packed on his horse and a determined set to his jaw. Flora watched from the porch as her father showed him the bunkhouse and toured him around the property, pointing out what needed doing. There was enough work to keep 3 men busy for months, but Lucas did not seem daunted. He just nodded and asked questions, his hands already itching to start. The first few weeks fell into an easy rhythm. Lucas worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences and fixing the barn roof and 100 other tasks that had been neglected for too long. Flora, still confined by her healing ankle, found excuses to be wherever he was working, bringing him water or helping in small ways. They talked while he worked, easy conversation that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. Flora learned that Lucas had a dry sense of humor and a quick mind, that he was gentle with animals and patient with difficult tasks. He told her about the places he had worked, the things he had seen in his travels, his dreams of someday having a ranch of his own where he could raise horses as well as cattle. "There is something about horses," he said one afternoon, hammering shingles while Flora sat in the shade nearby. "They are smart and loyal if you treat them right. I would like to breed cutting horses, the kind ranchers need for working cattle. Good ones can sell for real money. My father always said the difference between a poor ranch and a prosperous one is the quality of the horses," Flora said. "Your father is a smart man," Lucas said. He paused in his work, wiping sweat from his forehead, and looked down at her. "You know a lot about ranching for someone who has been stuck on a porch for weeks." "I grew up here," Flora said. "Papa taught me everything: how to read cattle, how to judge good land, how to manage books and breed stock. He always said that knowledge is worth more than gold in this country." "He is right about that too," Lucas said. There was something in his eyes, a warmth that made Flora's pulse quicken. As her ankle healed and she regained mobility, Flora started working alongside Lucas. Her father watched them with thinly veiled satisfaction, finding reasons to send them off together to check the far pastures or repair distant fences. They spent long days in the saddle, and Flora found herself falling in love with the sound of Lucas's laugh, the way he looked at the land with appreciation and respect, the gentleness of his hands when he helped her dismount. One evening in late June, they were riding back from checking the cattle when Lucas suddenly reined in his horse. Flora stopped beside him, following his gaze. The sun was setting behind the red rocks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple that seemed too beautiful to be real. "I never get tired of that," Lucas said quietly. "Neither do I," Flora said, but she was not looking at the sunset. She was looking at Lucas, at the way the fading light caught in his gray eyes and turned them silver. He must have felt her gaze because he turned toward her, and the expression on his face stole her breath. "Flora," he said, and there was something in the way he said her name that made her heart race. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Lucas dismounted and came to stand beside her horse, one hand on her knee, looking up at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "I came here to learn ranching, and I have learned more than I ever expected, but that is not why I stay. I stay because of you." Flora's mouth went dry. "Lucas, let me finish," he said gently. "From the moment I saw you trapped under that rock, something changed in me. I know it sounds crazy. I know we have only known each other a few weeks. But every day I spend with you, I fall a little more in love with your strength and your kindness and your laugh. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. And I know I have nothing to offer you, no land or money or prospects beyond what I can build with my own two hands. But if you would let me, I would spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy." Flora could barely breathe. She slid down from her horse, not caring about the twinge in her ankle, and stood facing him. "You saved my life," she said. "But more than that, you gave me something to live for. I was so lonely before you came, Lucas. I did not even realize how lonely until you were here and suddenly everything was brighter. I love you. I have loved you since you carried me through that rockslide, and I will love you until the day I die." Lucas made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then his arms were around her and he was kissing her. Flora melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and kissed him back with everything she had. He tasted like dust and sweat and something indefinably sweet, and she never wanted to stop. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know I should wait and court you properly, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Marry me, Flora." "Yes," Flora said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. They rode back to the ranch in a daze of happiness, hands clasped between their horses. Flora's father took one look at their faces and grinned. "I suppose I should start planning a wedding," he said. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Parowan, with half the town in attendance. Flora wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and Lucas wore a new suit he had bought especially for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Lucas kissed her, Flora felt like her heart might burst with joy. Her father gave them the ranch as a wedding present, announcing his intention to retire and move into town. "I am getting too old for this life," he said, though he was grinning. "Besides, this place needs young blood. You two will make something special here, I know it." Lucas tried to protest, but Flora's father was adamant. "You saved my daughter and made her happier than I have seen her in years. This is what she would have inherited anyway. Better to give it to you now when you can really use it than wait until I am dead." So Lucas and Flora became ranchers, building their life together one day at a time. Lucas proved to be as good as his word, working tirelessly to improve the operation while also starting his horse breeding program. Flora managed the books and the household, but also worked cattle alongside Lucas, the two of them a seamless team. Their first year of marriage was hard work but filled with joy. They expanded the herd, improved the bloodlines, made connections with buyers in Salt Lake City and beyond. The ranch began to prosper in ways it never had when Flora's father ran it alone. In the spring of 1883, Flora discovered she was pregnant. Lucas was beside himself with excitement, fussing over her until she finally had to tell him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I am having a baby, not dying," she said, exasperated and touched in equal measure. "I know," Lucas said, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "But you are carrying something precious, our child. I cannot help but want to protect you both." Their son was born in January of 1884, during a snowstorm that blanketed the valley in white. Lucas paced the floor while the midwife attended Flora, and when he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst into the room despite the midwife's protests. "A boy," Flora said, exhausted but radiant, holding the tiny bundle. "We have a son, Lucas." Lucas took the baby with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered, "just like his mother." They named him James, after Flora's father, and he grew up strong and healthy, with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Clara. She had Lucas's quiet determination and Flora's fierce spirit, and from the moment she could walk, she was following her father around the ranch. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch continued to prosper. Lucas's horse breeding program gained a reputation throughout the territory, and their children grew. Flora's father, living comfortably in Parowan, was a constant presence, doting on his grandchildren and offering advice when asked. On a summer evening in 1892, 10 years after the rockslide that had brought them together, Flora and Lucas sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. James was 8 now, already helping with the horses, and Clara was 6, fearless and bright. "You ever think about that day?" Flora asked, her hand finding Lucas's. "The rockslide, all the time," Lucas admitted. "It was the best and worst day of my life. Worst because you could have died, best because it brought me to you." "I used to be terrified of those canyons," Flora said. "But now when I see them, I just think about how lucky I was. Lucky the rocks trapped me instead of crushing me. Lucky you heard the slide. Lucky you were brave enough to come after me." "It was not luck," Lucas said, pulling her close. "It was fate. We were meant to find each other, Flora." "I believe that with everything in me." Flora tilted her face up for a kiss, and Lucas obliged, his lips warm and familiar against hers. In the yard, their children shrieked with laughter, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-tended, a testament to years of hard work and love. "I would go through it all again," Flora said quietly. "Every moment of pain and fear just to end up here with you." "You will never have to," Lucas promised. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are safe and happy and loved. That is a promise I made 10 years ago, and I intend to keep it until the day I die." They sat together as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched over them that first night when Lucas had come to dinner, when everything was new and uncertain. Now everything was certain. Their love, their family, their future together. More children came in the following years, another son they named Thomas in 1894, and twin daughters, Alina and Ruth, in 1897. The ranch house expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Lucas built a beautiful barn for his horses that was the envy of every rancher in the county. James grew into a fine young man who inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. By the time he was 18, he was running much of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing Lucas and Flora to slow down just a little. Clara married a neighboring rancher's son and started her own family just 5 miles down the valley, close enough to visit often. Flora's father passed peacefully in his sleep in 1899, having lived long enough to see all his grandchildren and to know that his daughter was happy and his legacy secure. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Flora with a trip to the spot where the Rockslide had been. The trail had been cleared years ago, made safer with retaining walls and drainage, but they could still see the scars on the canyon walls where the rocks had fallen. "I wanted to come back here," Lucas said, holding her hand as they stood where she had been trapped. "To remember where we started, and to thank that Rockslide for being stupid enough to trap you instead of killing you, because without it I never would have met the love of my life." Flora laughed, wiping tears from her eyes. "Only you would thank a Rockslide." "I thank it every day," Lucas said seriously. He pulled her close, his arms strong and steady around her. "Every single day I wake up next to you, I thank whatever force in the universe decided to spare you and bring you to me. You are my everything, Flora. My love, my partner, my best friend. I could not imagine my life without you in it." "You will never have to," Flora promised, echoing his words from years ago. "We are bound together now, you and I. Nothing will ever separate us." They kissed there in the canyon where they had met, where Flora had been trapped and Lucas had saved her, where their love story had begun with falling rocks and desperate hope. The canyon walls rose around them, ancient and enduring, witnesses to a love that had proven just as strong and lasting. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythm of ranch life. Their children grew and had children of their own, filling the ranch with noise and laughter. Lucas's hair turned gray, then white, but his hands remained steady and his love never wavered. Flora's beauty deepened with age, her face lined with laughter and sun, her spirit as fierce as ever. In the summer of 1925, 43 years after that fateful rockslide, Lucas and Flora sat on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play. They were both in their 60s now, their bodies marked by decades of hard work, but their love was as strong as it had been that first day. "We have had a good life," Flora said, leaning into Lucas's shoulder. "The best life," Lucas agreed. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the worn gold of her wedding band. "I would not change a single moment of it, not even the rockslide," Flora teased. "Especially not the rockslide," Lucas said firmly. That Rockslide gave me everything that matters. It gave me you." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the red rocks, painting the sky in those same impossible colors they had marveled at all those years ago. Their ranch spread out around them, 4 generations of family calling it home now, a legacy built on love and hard work and the courage of a young cowboy who had climbed through falling rocks to save a trapped woman. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. The story of the rockslide that brought them together, of love that began in a moment of terror and grew into something beautiful and lasting. The story of Lucas, who had climbed through danger without hesitation, and Flora, who had been brave enough to hold on until help arrived. Years later, long after both Lucas and Flora had passed peacefully in their sleep, within months of each other as couples long married sometimes do, their descendants would still tell the story. They would point to the canyon where it happened, though the scars had long since faded from the walls. They would speak of the love that had built the ranch they all called home, the love that had started with a rockslide and lasted a lifetime. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light hit the red rocks just right, the youngest children would swear they could see 2 figures standing together at the edge of the canyon, hand in hand, watching over the land and the family they had built together. A cowboy and the woman he had saved, their love eternal as the rocks themselves, a testament to the power of courage and fate, and a heart brave enough to love completely. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the legacy of Lucas and Flora. The barn Lucas built still stood, though it had been expanded and modernized. The house they had raised their children in remained the heart of the operation, filled with photographs and memories of a love story that had begun with tragedy and ended in triumph. And in the small cemetery on the hill where Flora's father had been buried, 2 headstones stood side by side, weathered by wind and time but still clearly legible. Lucas Carr, beloved husband and father; Flora Patterson Carr, beloved wife and mother. Together forever the rockslide had come down and trapped her on the trail, but the cowboy had climbed through and carried her free. And in saving her life he had found his own. Their story was complete, their love immortal, their legacy secure. It was a story of the West, of hardship and hope, of danger and deliverance, and above all, of a love that had conquered everything fate threw at it. A love story for the ages, born in a moment of crisis, and sustained through a lifetime of devotion, proving that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the very best.